A Good Man is Hard to Find. The Avon Book of Modern Writing, 1953. About the story. A Good Man is Hard to Find is a Southern Gothic short story first published in 1953 by author Flannery O'Connor who, in her own words, described it as the story of a family of six which, on its way driving to Florida, from Georgia, gets wiped out by an escaped convict who calls himself the Misfit. Put on your headphones and enjoy the story.
A good man is hard to find, Red Sammy said. Everything is getting terrible. I remember the day you could go off and leave your screen door unlatched. Not no more. He and the grandmother discussed better times. The old lady said that in her opinion Europe was entirely to blame for the way things were now. She said the way Europe acted you would think we were made of money, and Red Sam said it was no use talking about it. She was exactly right. The children ran outside into the white sunlight and looked at the monkey in the lacy chinaberry tree. He was busy catching fleas on himself and biting each one carefully between his teeth as if it were a delicacy. They drove off again into the hot afternoon. The grandmother took cat naps and woke up every few minutes with her own snoring. Outside of Toomsboro she woke up and recalled an old plantation that she had visited in this neighborhood once when she was a young lady. She said the house had 6 white columns across the front and that there was an avenue of oaks leading up to it and 2 little wooden trellis arbors on either side in front where you sat down with your suitor after a stroll in the garden. She recalled exactly which road to turn off to get to it. She knew that Bailey would not be willing to lose any time looking at an old house, but the more she talked about it, the more she wanted to see it once again and find out if the little twin arbors were still standing. There was a secret panel in this house, she said craftily, not telling the truth but wishing that she were, and the story went that all the family silver was hidden in it when Sherman came through but it was never found. Quote. Hey. John Wesley said. Let's go see it. We'll find it. We'll poke all the woodwork and find it. Who lives there? Where do you turn off at? Hey Pop, can't we turn off there? We never have seen a house with a secret panel. June Star shrieked. Let's go to the house with the secret panel. Hey Pop, can't we go see the house with the secret panel? It's not far from here, I know, the grandmother said. It wouldn't take over 20 minutes. Bailey was looking straight ahead. His jaw was as rigid as a horseshoe. No, he said. The children began to yell and scream that they wanted to see the house with the secret panel. John Wesley kicked the back of the front seat and June Star hung over her mother's shoulder and whined desperately into her ear that they never had any fun even on their vacation, that they could never do what they wanted to do. The baby began to scream and John Wesley kicked the back of the seat so hard that his father could feel the blows in his kidney. All right, he shouted and drew the car to a stop at the side of the road. Will you all shut up? Will you all just shut up for 1 second? If you don't shut up, we won't go anywhere. It would be very educational for them, the grandmother murmured. All right, Bailey said, but get this. This is the only time we're going to stop for anything like this. This is the one and only time. The dirt road that you have to turn down is about a mile back, the grandmother directed. I marked it when we passed. A dirt road, Bailey groaned. After they had turned around and were headed toward the dirt road, the grandmother recalled other points about the house, the beautiful glass over the front doorway and the candle lamp in the hall. John Wesley said that the secret panel was probably in the fireplace. You can't go inside this house, Bailey said. You don't know who lives there. While you all talk to the people in front, I'll run around behind and get in a window, John Wesley suggested. We'll all stay in the car, his mother said. They turned onto the dirt road and the car raced roughly along in a swirl of pink dust. The grandmother recalled the times when there were no paved roads and 30 miles was a day's journey. The dirt road was hilly and there were sudden washes in it and sharp curves on dangerous embankments. All at once they would be on a hill, looking down over the blue tops of trees for miles around, then the next minute, they would be in a red depression with the dust-coated trees looking down on them. This place had better turn up in a minute, Bailey said, or I'm going to turn around. The road looked as if no one had traveled on it in months. It's not much farther, the grandmother said, and just as she said it, a horrible thought came to her. The thought was so embarrassing that she turned red in the face and her eyes dilated and her feet jumped up, upsetting her valise in the corner. The instant the valise moved, the newspaper top she had over the basket under it rose with a snarl and pity sing. The cat sprang onto Bailey's shoulder. The children were thrown to the floor and their mother, clutching the baby, was thrown out the door onto the ground. The old lady was thrown into the front seat. The car turned over once and landed right side up in a gulch off the side of the road. Bailey remained in the driver's seat with the cat gray striped with a broad white face and an orange nose clinging to his neck like a caterpillar. As soon as the children saw they could move their arms and legs, they scrambled out of the car, shouting, "We've had an accident." The grandmother was curled up under the dashboard, hoping she was injured so that Bailey's wrath would not come down on her all at once. The horrible thought she had had before the accident was that the house she had remembered so vividly was not in Georgia but in Tennessee. Bailey removed the cat from his neck with both hands and flung it out the window against the side of a pine tree. Then he got out of the car and started looking for the children's mother. She was sitting against the side of the red-gutted ditch, holding the screaming baby, but she only had a cut down her face and a broken shoulder. "We've had an accident." The children screamed in a frenzy of delight. "But nobody's killed," June Starr said with disappointment as the grandmother limped out of the car, her hat still pinned to her head but the broken front brim standing up at a jaunty angle and the violet spray hanging off the side. They all sat down in the ditch, except the children, to recover from the shock. They were all shaking. "Maybe a car will come along," said the children's mother hoarsely. "I believe I have injured an organ," said the grandmother, pressing her side, but no one answered her. Bailey's teeth were clattering. He had on a yellow sport shirt with bright blue parrots designed in it and his face was as yellow as the L shirt. The grandmother decided that she would not mention that the house was in Tennessee. The road was about 10 feet above and they could see only the tops of the trees on the other side of it. Behind the ditch they were sitting in there were more woods, tall and dark and deep. In a few minutes they saw a car some distance away on top of a hill, coming slowly as if the occupants were watching them. The grandmother stood up and waved both arms dramatically to attract their attention. The car continued to come on slowly, disappeared around a bend and appeared again, moving even slower, on top of the hill they had gone over. It was a big black battered hearse-like automobile. There were 3 men in it. It came to a stop just over them and for some minutes, the driver looked down with a steady expressionless gaze to where they were sitting, and didn't speak. Then he turned his head and muttered something to the other 2 and they got out. One was a fat boy in black trousers and a red sweatshirt with a silver stallion embossed on the front of it. He moved around on the right side of them and stood staring, his mouth partly open in a kind of loose grin. The other had on khaki pants and a blue striped coat and a gray hat pulled down very low, hiding most of his face. He came around slowly on the left side. Neither spoke. The driver got out of the car and stood by the side of it, looking down at them. He was an older man than the other 2. His hair was just beginning to gray and he wore silver-rimmed spectacles that gave him a scholarly look. He had a long creased face and didn't have on any shirt or undershirt. He had on blue jeans that were too tight for him and was holding a black hat and a gun. The 2 boys also had guns. "We've had an accident," the children screamed. The grandmother had the peculiar feeling that the bespectacled man was someone she knew. His face was as familiar to her as if she had known him all her life but she could not recall who he was. He moved away from the car and began to come down the embankment, placing his feet carefully so that he wouldn't slip. He had on tan and white shoes and no socks, and his ankles were red and thin. "Good afternoon," he said. "I see you all had you a little spill." "We turned over twice," said the grandmother. "Once," he corrected. "We seen it happen. Try their car and see will it run, Hiram," he said quietly to the boy with the gray hat. "What you got that gun for?" John Wesley asked. "What you gonna do with that gun?" "Lady," the man said to the children's mother, "would you mind calling them children to sit down by you? Children make me nervous. I want you all to sit down right together there where you're at." "What are you telling us what to do for?" June Starr asked. Behind them the line of woods gaped like a dark open mouth. "Come here," said their mother. "Look here now," Bailey began suddenly, "we're in a predicament. We're in. ... Quote. The grandmother shrieked. She scrambled to her feet and stood staring. "You're the Misfit," she said. "I recognized you at once." "Yes'm," the man said, smiling slightly as if he were pleased in spite of himself to be known, "but it would have been better for all of you, lady, if you hadn't have recognized me." Bailey turned his head sharply and said something to his mother that shocked even the children. The old lady began to cry and the Misfit reddened. "Lady," he said, "don't you get upset. Sometimes a man says things he don't mean. I don't reckon he meant to talk to you that-a-way." You wouldn't shoot a lady, would you? The grandmother said and removed a clean handkerchief from her cuff and began to slap at her eyes with it. The misfit pointed the toe of his shoe into the ground and made a little hole and then covered it up again. I would hate to have to, he said. Listen, the grandmother almost screamed, I know you're a good man. You don't look a bit like you have common blood. I know you must come from nice people. Yes, ma'am, he said, finest people in the world. When he smiled, he showed a row of strong white teeth. God never made a finer woman than my mother, and my daddy's heart was pure gold, he said. The boy with the red sweatshirt had come around behind them and was standing with his gun at his hip. The misfit squatted down on the ground. Watch them, children, Bobby Lee, he said. You know they make me nervous. He looked at the 6 of them huddled together in front of him and he seemed to be embarrassed as if he couldn't think of anything to say. Ain't a cloud in the sky, he remarked, looking up at it. Don't see no sun but don't see no cloud neither. Yes, it's a beautiful day, said the grandmother. Listen, she said, you shouldn't call yourself the misfit because I know you're a good man at heart. I can just look at you and tell. Hush. Bailey yelled. Hush. Everybody shut up and let me handle this. He was squatting in the position of a runner about to sprint forward, but he didn't move. I appreciate that, lady, the misfit said and drew a little circle in the ground with the butt of his gun. It'll take a half hour to fix this here car, Hiram called, looking over the raised hood of it.